Get going. Great, well, welcome everybody to Ignite 2019. My name is Matt Mellon. I'm a senior manager on the internal information security team at Palo Alto Networks, and I'm responsible for our Security Operations Center, or SOC. I'm joined by Vidya here. She is on my team and kind of the brains behind our hunting program. This session is focused on how we've deployed hunting within Palo Alto Networks using Cortex XDR. The two applications within Cortex XDR, the investigation and response app and the analytics app. So in terms of an agenda, if I can get this to progress, I'm going to talk a little bit about our threat detection program internally within our SOC. And how we have employed a couple different types of hunting methodologies to proactively search for threats that were either missed by technology or missed by our alerting program. How they break down into structured and unstructured hunting types. So we're going to go through what that means and how they align to the BIOCs that you might see in XDR, the investigation and response app, and unstructured hunting through the Cortex Analytics app. Then we're going to go through a demo and deep dive of a couple BIOCs that fired in our internal production environment, and how through our hunting efforts we were able to use that to kind of automate some of the processes that we had been doing manually prior. And then walk through a couple key takeaways. Who here works in an organization with a formal SOC? All right, so about a third of you. Awesome. Every SOC should have a mission. This is ours. This is like our formal SOC mission. But really, from what I'm trying to communicate here is that we're internally focused. We're protecting Palo Alto Networks from successful cyber attacks. We're not an MSSP. We don't protect customer firewalls. But the two main services that the SOC provides the Palo Alto Networks organization include threat detection and threat response, or incident response. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've broken up the different methodologies for threat detection into three groups. So you can't alert on everything. A lot of SOCs, I think, make a mistake where you buy a SIM, you turn on all the alerts, you deploy them into the SOC and say, good luck. And so the SOC is just swimming in a sea of alerts, and you inevitably have to kind of ignore some and pay attention to others. We believe that there are three different methodologies that you can fit different types of threat detections into that make sense based on a couple factors. The expected detection fidelity, so this is the percentage of time that when you see a particular threat, alert fire, whether or not that's a true positive. The alerting program is excellent for high fidelity alerts that don't fire frequently, that when they do fire, it's probably going to be actionable. It's probably going to be a true positive, 70 to 90 to 100% of the time. The frequency should relatively be rare. You don't want these type of events that you're alerting on to happen all the time, because again, you don't want that alert explosion that traditional SOCs face. Monitoring is a different strategy that we've employed that focuses on dashboards. So these are dashboards that you look at either a couple times a day or once a day to keep an eye on things that are lower fidelity. These are things that are accurate and are truly positive 5 to 70-ish% of the time. And so the frequency there is more than the alerting program. And then the hunting program is great at those very low fidelity types of indicators that you're looking for. You're going to see a lot more of these. You need to hunt through those, proactively hunt through them, as opposed to alerting or monitoring in a dashboard. So the intent of the hunting program is to proactively discover threats through unconventional means, things that were either missed by technology or missed by our other detection type programs. Now, as We are, in a sense, a customer of our own products. We've deployed all of our products internally at Palo Alto Networks to protect ourselves from successful cyber attacks. So some of the, that's why we're kind of giving you feedback and observations about how we've kind of pivoted some of our hunting functions in our SOC that should make sense to you. So some of the challenges with the legacy hunting approach for those SOCs out there who have tried to stand up a hunting program internally, it requires a lot of expert level knowledge in a couple different security domains and data science domains. Hard to find people with those skills. It's hard to ramp up on those types of skills. Requiring a lot of tools to aggregate different logs and data. So you have to figure out which logs are important and aggregate them in one place, which requires a lot of like plumbing and security engineering and just work generally. And then third, you need to figure out what you're searching for, those use cases that help you identify the hypotheses or the threat use cases that you're actually searching for. There is no book on hunting that I know of that's effective. So when we talk about what XDR brings to the table in the upcoming slides, it really addresses these three main challenges that we and other SOCs have had with the legacy hunting approach. So that's where Cortex XDR comes into play. Right now, it's helping us in two main ways, two main kind of use cases. It facilitates our incident response processes and our threat hunting. So on the incident response front, we're using Cortex XDR to figure out basically the causation, like the root cause analysis for when other threats fire. For example, if the firewall fires a command and control IPS signature, using Cortex to figure out, okay, what on the endpoint actually generated the traffic that went over the network that fired that signature. It's really helpful to be able to zero in on that endpoint because Traps is collecting all this data from the endpoint and pushing it into the data lake to facilitate that sort of analysis. But the topic of this section is how it's augmenting or really automating a lot of these things that we're doing in our hunting program. So I'm going to talk first about BIOCs. BIOCs are behavioral indicators of compromise as opposed to indicators of compromise. Traditional IOCs are a little bit lower on the pyramid of pain. They are things like file hashes, domains, IP addresses. Behavioral indicators of compromise are just that. They indicate behaviors that are happening on the endpoint, and they help you zero in on the most important events that are firing on your endpoints. So BIOCs you'll see in the Cortex XDR investigation and response app, not in the analytics app. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But these behavioral indicators of compromise are essentially setting up 200 use cases that feed into your hunting programs. So a couple example BIOC rules in the XDR investigation and response app. Microsoft Office Processes spawns a commonly abused process. Not every time that fires will be a true positive. As you'll see in the next slide, that's one that has generated hundreds and hundreds of quote-unquote events or alerts aligning to that in our environment. Great hunting use case, not a great alerting use case. Adobe Acrobat Reader drops an executable file to disk. Similarly there, PDFs are often weaponized by threat actors. So this is definitely going to be something that will help you zero in on potentially suspicious activity. But at the same time, you can't alert on this because, as we found in our own environment, there are a lot of times when legitimate, benign processes generate this activity as well. And then processes with a double extension like .gif.exe, right? If you're on a default Win10 and someone in HR doesn't show the extension in Windows, when they actually view that, it's going to look like their favorite cat image with a .gif, but it's actually an executable that's going to run. And then just skipping to the last three, PowerShell running with a known Mimikatz argument. This is an alertable BIOC in our environment, and probably yours. You shouldn't expect to see Mimikatz, this common attacker tool or hacker tool, to pull credentials off of a server in your environment. It's a great alerting use case. Process attempts to kill a known security or AV tool, very alertable. We never want to see that. Process runs from the recycle bin, similarly that alertable. So some of these are going to fire more frequently than others. So it's really part of the tuning and analysis process when you do roll out Cortex XDR to figure out, okay, what are the right ones in your environment that are alertable, monitoring, or huntable. So I mentioned 200. So out of the box right now, there's about 198 BIOCs that come predefined. And each one is aligned to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So it gives you, it allows you to align your detections and your hunting efforts with a variety of different phases in the MITRE ATT&CK framework. The MITRE ATT&CK framework is this industry standard for categorizing threats into a logical construct that you can basically attack your threat analysis in a more repeatable, organized way. And you'll notice like the top one there, sensitive Google Chrome files accessed by a non-Google process. Could be sketchy, could result in some kind of threat, but that fired 2,500 times in our environment in a few months. So good hunting use case, not good for alerting. So the other one, Cortex Analytics. So that's the second XDR app within the Cortex XDR app suite, if you will. And it provides automatic baselining and anomaly detection. So historically, folks have asked me to, hey, Matt, baseline normal and just fire alerts on abnormal activity. Sounds easy, extremely difficult, right? You need purpose-built tools to help facilitate that. The analytics app in Cortex really helps there because it has about 30 predefined rules that will baseline normal in your environment. It'll do a look back of varying degrees up to, say, 30 days back to say, hey, what does normal look like? And then alert on new abnormal activity in these particular categories. So just in a couple examples there, uncommon local scheduled task creation via scheduled tasks exe. Scheduled tasks is, or it could be abused by attackers to facilitate persistence on an endpoint. Definitely not going to result in a alertable indicator, but great for hunting. New administrative behavior is a good one because it can help you zero in on outbound SSH or RDP connections. So these administrative connections that are not normal. So these are new connections from users who have not connected to these particular administrative services in the past X number of days, in the past 30 days. So it does a lot of that analysis and data science for you up front. So it's basically you get this alert that you need to review. And then large file upload. So again, it'll learn over time what's normal in your environment in terms of uploading large files to external locations, so that you don't have to, manually do that. So similarly, the alerts that it'll fire from the analytics app are also aligned to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So they align to like phases like persistence, discovery, execution, so that you can have a more organized approach to hunting particular MITRE phases. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Vidya, who's going to talk through how the structured and unstructured hunting methodologies are used within Cortex, and then a deep dive. Vidya.
Thank you, Matt.
Sure.
Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, cool. Some of you might have actually wondered why this session was called Stand and Still Hunting. This is actually based off of a real wildlife-based analogy. So stand hunting is one where a hunter places stands in predefined or preconceived areas for the hunt prey or the game to come by. On the other hand, still hunting is one where the hunter does not stand still, but prowls through the landscape looking for anomalies so that he could get to his prey. And that sort of neatly equates to our cyber hunting methodologies, which we use at our Palo Alto Network SOC, which is the structured and the unstructured hunting. So what actually differentiates what a structured hunting is versus what an unstructured hunting is basically the data that you hunt on and the analysis techniques that you use to hunt on that data. So what do I actually mean by that? So let's look at it first from a structured hunting perspective. So the data that I want for a structured hunt are very specific use cases or very specific hypotheses. For example, I'm looking for specific registry tampering behavior. That could be a predefined hunt use case. And what are the techniques that I would generally want when I would choose to do a structured hunt? Generally, a structured hunt becomes a query, which would result in a number of events. However, in order to investigate it further, we would still require associated events that would be grouped or clustered or stacked together in meaningful groups so that you would be able to quickly get to the root cause of the evil. And how exactly do we want, or how exactly is that being fulfilled by the Cortex XDR, which we are leveraging at our SOC? One is the BIOCs, which Matt mentioned before. So the behavioral indicators of compromise, they don't only just give predefined hunting use cases, but they are also aligned to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And every BIOC that comes out of the box is labeled against a category, which is basically the MITRE ATT&CK tactic. And the techniques that we would want to quickly get to the analysis of that hunt event or the hunt result is also provided by the causation or the causality cards instance, which you will be seeing in a bit while I do the deep dive. So what about unstructured hunting? How does this framework overlay on that? When we do unstructured hunting, again, it's much more complex, given the fact that the data that we would be using is pretty much everything. That includes the logs from the network, that includes the logs from the endpoint. And if we have to analyze the data that comes out for an unstructured hunt, that also becomes much more complex because the data analysis techniques would involve data science stuff like baselining off of historical context to know what is normal from abnormal, or statistical and frequency analysis to know, hey, this particular network session went off of this particular threshold, so yes, it's abnormal, you have to go and look at it. Or even just machine learning to learn across different or hundreds of dimensions of data to say that a combination of all of these events is why you should consider this as abnormal. And lastly, prioritization. When you look at unstructured hunts, when you don't really have specific use cases in mind, you would still want a way for looking at what actually matters. And that is given to you by the analytics alerts feature, which actually fire off of the detector algorithms that are already pre-built within the product, and also the risk score assessment, which it gives based off of the attack tactic that it aligns to. So given the fact that we have been emphasizing a lot on the attack MITRE framework here, what exactly should our hunting philosophy be like, or why are these tactics important? So as you might see, this is the cyber attack lifecycle, and the upper part of it is the generalized lifecycle that we all know of to describe attacker progression. And the ones that we see below are basically the attack MITRE tactics that align to the different phases of that lifecycle. It's just a more granularized version. Given the fact that threat hunting's main motive is to basically look at what your technology has missed, we would want to focus more on the right side of the life cycle and expect our technology to take care of most of the things that have already progressed through the left side. And that's why we want to focus our people efforts more on the tactics that align to the right side, such as credential access, persistence, exfiltration, lateral movement. Those are the things that we would typically want to focus on when we want to do a hunt. And that's kind of how we are going to prioritize our two use cases as well, which we'll be demonstrating to you in a couple of seconds. One is actually a structured use case that is based on the persistence tactic, and the other is an unstructured hunt, which will be based on the exfiltration tactic. So without further ado, let's actually get into the deep dive. So the first use case is basically the persistence, and what persistence is it is a tactic or a technique which will do all sorts of configuration changes so as to be able to persist within a system despite restarts or misconfigurations or any other type of interruption. So in order to hunt for that, we are going to be looking for a specific BIOC, and we are going to sort of start analyzing our use case from there. So let's do it. So over here, before I go further into this particular use case, this screen that you see here, that is basically the alert screen that pops up on the XDR investigation and response app. And these alerts have filters, and the alert screen not only aggregates the BIOC events, but it also aggregates events from traps, the events from firewall, and also the alert events from analytics. So for our structured use case, as you see on this little top ribbon here, we are going to be filtering it out just for the BIOC. The source will be the BIOC, and the category will be a persistence. So that's what you see here in the results as well. So let's get started. So you see here that there are several events. Here the username is actually being contracted, but it's for the same user that the same BIOC has actually been alerted on. And the BIOC that actually that's been alerted is called new entry added to startup related registries by an unsigned process. So that is typical behavior of any malware that wants to persist. Apart from that, we also see that here the executable or the initiator command consists of a really weird looking executable called omo.exe. So let's actually get into looking at what it is. So when you want to do a deep dive on what each event means, it's going to bring up the causality cards where it's actually going to aggregate the associated events, as I mentioned before. So let's see what is up. So when we analyze, it takes you to the causality card. And the first thing that you see here is the causality chain, which gives you a quick view of this process on this process, and this executable basically was initiated by this particular other executable. And when you click on each of the executable on the process chain, it will give you the things that you see in the pane right to the bottom. It gives you results of what other BIOCs fired in the alerts tab. And then it gives you a quick overview of what the network, the file, the registry, and module behaviors are, basically the EDR events that are associated with that particular executable. And the black belt that you see here is going to just aggregate some of the intelligence material, some threat intel data off of some of our sandbox environment like Wildfire, which will classify this as benign or malware. So just a quick caveat before I dive any deeper into this is the fact that initially when we hunted this on our production instance, Wildfire was not able to catch this particular executable. And that kind of fulfilled our motive of threat hunting. We were able to unravel something that our technology missed, and we were actively able to contribute to the improvement henceforth. So let's actually look at what this executable is doing or what it's up to. So we see all of these tabs here, and let's get into the first alerts tab here. So as you can see, it actually has fired off 16 times for the same machine. That doesn't look right, and it's also around the same time period, as you can see on the timestamp. So it's a registry-related BIOC, so let's look at the registry behaviors first and see what values were. So it says a dope flash, a dope update. That's pretty dope. And then it says show super hidden. So those are actually like typical values that, typical tampering behaviors that any persistent malware would exhibit. So let's try to corroborate this further, right? Let's see what other EDR behaviors were associated with this. Let's get into the network behavior off of the endpoint. It says that it goes to this 178.237 IP, and it's some random GoDaddy website. Oh, sorry. It's a random GoDaddy website, which is called geoplugin.net. So let's also look at the file behaviors. It looks like it's done a lot of .lnk writes to these weird-looking locations called C, Skype, and C, what else? C Intel. So those are not things that you would expect of, and that to an executable which was unsigned to be doing all of these things. So that pretty much kind of like starts to tell us, okay, this is definitely malicious. In order to corroborate that further, we also want to see what other libraries it has touched. So the thing that XDR does is it actually behaves like a mini filter, right? It's going to go at the thread level and tell you what are the EDR associated EDR behaviors. So we go to the module and we see that all of the DLLs that it's actually trying to touch are startup-related DLLs, and that is typical behavior of persistence malware. So in order to corroborate this further, assuming that, let's say, Wildfire never actually caught this, we are going to look at other threat intel sources and see what the detection ratio is. So here is where we actually could pivot to open-in virus total right from the causality chain itself, and that's going to give you more results. Okay, so that's a lot of, that's a great detection ratio, which means that we need to go back and reclassify this particular malware as reclassify this particular executable from benign to malware, and immediately get into the incident response mode where we get to reimage the system and yeah, close the case. So yeah, that's pretty much the summary of what we just did. It's a structured hunt. We looked for persistence-based behavior. We looked for specific persistence-based behavior that are related to registries. And then we did a lot of looking through the associated EDR behaviors. We looked at the causality card. We were quickly able to get to the root cause of it and quickly able to get to the reclassification and reimaging. So that concludes our first use case. Now our second use case will be also based off of one of those tactics that you saw in the cyber attack lifecycle, and it's called exfiltration. And just a caveat, this is not something that we saw in our production instance, and if we did, we both would probably not be here. So this was something that we spun up on our demo environment just to sort of demonstrate the capability. So the hypothesis that we are going to be starting off is, let's look at anything anomalous inside my network that would be typical exfiltration behavior. So let's unfortunately, we don't have a video like before, but then I'm just going to run you through a couple of screenshots, which will involve shots from the XDR INR app and the XDR Analytics app. So let's get into it. So first, just like how we saw before, we are going to place the filter saying, hey, look for analytics and look for exfiltration. Look for any signature that fired off for exfiltration. And then that would give you this, that actually gave us this event. So this particular event says a large amount of data was uploaded to this 90.whatever IP with app ID, and then the Wildfire verdict for that particular executable, and then the signature for that particular executable, what's the MD5. So the description kind of like says that it's kind of correlated data, not just off of the network sessions that it saw, but also off of the endpoint, and kind of also adds the Wildfire component to it. So there are 3 different sources that you see on this description here. So what do I do to analyze this further? Just click on Analyze like we did before. Right-click and Analyze, and that will take you to the Analytics screen, which is just going to give you a visual representation of what you just saw as a description. And the Analytics screen is also going to provide the network sessions that actually led analytics to believe that it was an abnormality in the environment. So here you see that a WinSCP process has tried to go out to this 90 dot whatever IP, and there's this one particular session that's transferred around 2000 MB to this domain called speedtest.tele2.net. So let's look at what that is. Let's look at every outgoing connection to that particular IP from the system. That in turn is going to pre-populate that query and take you back to the incident response, the XDR incident response app, where it will again show you the same network sessions. However, the advantage of coming into the INR app is that you can furthermore investigate it and try to pivot to the causality cards and see what was the process associated with it and what was the entire chain of events that led to this. So post that, we're going to be analyzing it, just like how we did before. So once you click on Analyze, it's going to take you to the causality cards instance again, where you're going to see the entire chain of events. So it looks like WinSCP was one of the children processes from Explorer++, which is a file explorer utility. And we also see a 7zg.exe, a 7-zip process that also got spawned off of it. And you can also see from the black belt below that the command line that it tried to execute was to actually get some data off of a particular IP address, which is blacked out here, an IP address, and then a particular file location within that server maybe. It says file server and then data. So that's kind of like an indication, the first indication that some kind of exfiltration may be happening. So we pivot further, and yeah, I just brought you guys to the attention of that. So to pivot further, what we are going to do is do the same thing that we did before. We are going to look at the bottom ribbon to see what are the related alerts or EDR behaviors. However, just by looking at what alerts, what BIOCs fired for this particular 7zg.exe, we'd be able to understand that, yes, there is exfiltration happening. So when you see here, it says that an informational BIOC or a collection-based BIOC saying access to documents on sensitive share has been touched. So that means, this particular BIOC was just custom built for the purposes of this demo. But if there were, a signature that said, "Hey, there's this location on my server that, if touched, please fire," right? And if that has fired, then that would mean that yes, something was actually exfiltrated out. So this is when our incident response plan kicks in, and we try to remediate it if this were a real-life situation. So just to summarize, we saw network FTP sessions off of analytics, and then we pivoted back to INR to look at the causality of the entire chain of events. And then we kicked off IRP upon confirmation to say, hey, this is something that we definitely need to remediate and get to. So that kind of concludes our 2 use case demos. So the key takeaways, I think, should be the fact that whatever problems we initially laid out for hunting, that it requires a lot of skills to do it with tool consolidation and with integration across different sources. This just becomes much easier with the XDR platform, which we had managed to leverage at our SOC. And also the many tools that we want to aggregate this is also kind of coming into that single pane. So that consolidation is kind of taking care of it for you. And apart from that, the use cases, which one has to typically, if done manually, be researching about or be sitting and having meetings about, instead of doing such kind of research-based or constructing research-based BIOs or signatures manually. By using the predefined hunting use cases, you would still be able to find a lot of weird things that fire in your environment. And we've been talking a lot about the MITRE ATT&CK framework and why it's important, and why every analytics app or app alert or why every XDR BIOC has been aligned to that. It's typically because it best represents all types of known attacker TTPs that are out there. And it's also because the MITRE ATT&CK framework is the best representation of what we can measure our tools against. With that said, we did have a MITRE evaluation that happened against Cortex XDR. And as you can see in some of these results, it did perform really well amidst some really key players in the market. And apart from that, we also see that it's been able to miss only a very few attacks that the MITRE evaluation actually did. So with that, we will conclude our session and open it up to questions.